welcome to the Brain Scrub, a somewhat improvised approach to mental health. My name is Glenn Sollers. Thanks for tuning into today's episode. I haven't recorded an episode for a while. It's November 30th, 2024, and it's been a few weeks. And it's because I've been struggling with a topic that I want to talk about, which is really important to me. And I haven't been able to figure out how I'm going to do it. So I'm going to do my best in this episode. I might bounce all over the place as I do this, but I figured sometimes you just have to do it and not just talk about it, but actually express what's going on. And through words, things appear. And hopefully what I talk about today makes sense to you. This is not going to apply to everybody out there, but I just want to build some awareness around parental alienation and the impact and the efforts that are going out there to stop this and to get governments to rethink things, and my frustration with it, my experience with it. And my hope is that after this episode, you'll have a better understanding of what an alienating parent goes through, the importance of addressing this issue that's out there, because we need more advocates. We also need people to come together. There's so many different people out there advocating for what is right and what should be done. And these include a large part kids that have been alienated from their parents, and then they start to realize the truth. The holiday season's coming up. And this has always been, since this alienation that I've been through, been a sad part of the year for me, because Christmas is family time. Yet we live in a society where it's so easy, in some cases, to break apart a family. And it's kind of like you're murdering off a family member. My ex-wife murdered my son's father's side of the family. And in a criminal case, there's people who are guilty with evidence. And in many parental alienation cases, it's he said, she said, without looking at the facts, with believing somebody and what they're saying, or letting go of any accountability or future thinking about what the impact on the child and the extended family and the other side of the family, what impact that's going to have. And we live in Canada in a family legal system where a judge has so much power over ruining the lives of others through their assumptions, through raising up their hands, nothing I can do. And as a result, kids, parents, extended family members suffer. And it doesn't have to happen this way. And yet it does. And I will never forget the day when the judge in North Vancouver said this to me. And it was after I shared that my ex was not following the custody arrangement, the visitation arrangement, and the judge said, "I cannot force your 13-year-old child to see you." Those words I will never forget. And the fact that this type of behavior is allowed in a legal system without any clear evidence as to why something is happening is such an atrocity. It is such a violation of rights of people that a judge can actually say those words and end a family relationship. And people suffer as a consequence. Now, I'm not trying to play victim here, but I am a victim to the family justice system. And many of us fall into this. Now, sadly, there's not a lot of education that goes on. There's not a lot of information out there around what alienation is until you actually experience it. People are not prepared for this. I was not prepared for this. I didn't know what was going on. And yes, every parent plays their part in family relationships, but at the foundation of healthy kids is a healthy family unit. Many are getting divorced. There's a propensity of black and white thinking across North America and different parts of the world, us versus them. And this is, for me, toxic, because there is, in many cases, no exploration of what's going on. There's no critical thinking. There's no trying to understand the other side and what's happening. And this destroys families. This type of thinking, it destroys countries. I have been advocating to the federal government and the provincial governments in Canada and have gotten nowhere. Letters back saying there's nothing we can do. It's too complex. So as a result, I've been doing tons of research on this, watching different videos, and one podcast that I started listening to that was very powerful for me was done by Bill Eddy. It's All Your Fault. And the podcast is brilliant. It's about high conflict personalities. And Bill Eddy used to work in the family law system, he used to be a lawyer. And some recent episodes really shine the light on the fact that when you're dealing with an alienation case, as an example, okay, and I'm just going to call the person who's alienating is murdering the other family. It should be a criminal offense. This is child abuse. This is parental abuse. This is everything. Now, the challenge is, and I'm not diagnosing my ex-wife at all. I'm not labeling in any way. However, what he says in his podcast, based on his research, and they teach lawyers how to be lawyers. They teach judges how to do different things. They teach people how to deal with high conflict. Is 10% of the population out there has a personality disorder. And sometimes people just have difficult behaviors. Now, it's important to know that people who have a personality disorder, it's not their fault. This is just based on their experience, how their brain operates. That's just how they see things. So in terms of being what we might see as a rational human being, somebody with a personality disorder may not have that. And I suspect I was dealing with borderline personality disorder in my ex. I'm suspecting narcissism and maybe antisocial disorder. Now, I didn't get that back then. I didn't understand things. When this all transpired, when we started seeing that there was challenges with my son, instead of what a rational person would do is, let's try to figure this out. The family unit is really important. It's important to have a mother and father in a family. There was no problem solving. We need to get rid of the problem. And this is one of the things. If people cannot problem solve or do what a rational human being would do, then there's likely a personality disorder there that you're dealing with. But I didn't get it at the time. So I was trying to work with my ex-wife. I was trying to resolve the problem, but it just made things worse. And I became desperate. I was trying different things because I'm rational. And yeah, there's times where I shouldn't have pushed so much in different things. However, I didn't know what I was up against. Now, in a lot of alienation cases, and I don't have the data on this, but it's a high percent of parents who alienate their kids have a personality disorder. Get that, people. Understand that this is what's going on. And I didn't know the signs. There was a history of my ex firing people who didn't align with what she thought. She wasn't dating. She dated one person and claimed he was a sociopath. And I would argue, I wonder if that was true or not. Or was she indeed the sociopath in this case? I listen to my son's podcast sometimes, which is a mistake. And he clearly has these opinions of me that are negative. He also has many opinions of his mom that can't share anything with her, anything like that. Like, he lives in a very dysfunctional home by the sounds of it, and he has no connection to me whatsoever. And this is really important to get before you get married, everybody. If you have kids, get to understand your partner, their history, what they've been through. How might these establish patterns in their life? What are some behaviors that you find a bit odd? So my ex was very jealous. Again, fired people. She had emotional reactions. She was violent. She threw things. She hit me. I was a victim of domestic abuse, but I didn't stand up for myself. And I let that run over me. I was threatened to have my son taken away. Like, I was dealing with threats constantly, and I gave in because I had no backbone. I had no courage. I lived in a state of fear. That's my bad. And I wish I would have picked up on the signs early. I wish I would be educated. And Bill Eddy does a great job at educating people on what to watch out for. Like things that he mentioned in one of his episodes around, and this is just general stuff, that if your partner or the person who's alienating, if you can check these boxes, then likely you're dealing with somebody who has some sort of personality disorder, that they're charming. And in my case, yes, when my ex wanted something, she was super charming, super caring, very loving, but then they have the extreme that they will fly off the handle if there's an emotion there. Like if there's anger. One time I said I was going to be late from a ski trip that I did in Whistler, and we're going to be late to pick up my son. Instantly, she got so upset and threatened, Glenn, will take your son away from you. You should not be doing this. Extreme emotions that they con others into doing things. And I was conned. There's blame. There's no personal responsibility in anything. That you're the problem. You're doing it. I was berated once in front of my son, as was my wife, about our behaviors. That, Glenn, you're so selfish. You're thinking about yourself. You don't think about your son, right in front of my son. So blaming. My wife was late to pick him up from school. She blamed her and said, how dare you do this, right in front of my son. So this is abuse. This is verbal abuse. Mind you, I was also abused physically from my ex. That they're fabricating stories. And this is one thing that could be picked up on the affidavit. There was complete fabrication of so many stories about what was going on to make them sound right. They're really good at manipulating and charming. And that's also another problem in front of the judge, is they know how to get their way. My ex, super intelligent. She knows how to do things, how to get things done for her own ego needs. And of course, protecting my son. And my ex has had a terrible childhood from what I know. And it's no wonder she does what she does. So I have compassion, but sadly, my family and I have been murdered from his life, and there's no end to the grieving process. I feel sad on a regular basis because my son is not seeing me based on manipulation, and I want nothing more than to have him in my life, and I can't. A judge has taken that away from me. Our family law system, and I'm just reinstating this, that is designed to protect families, protect children from abuse, allows this abuse to happen through their words and their judgments and their assessments and their lack of judgment and assessment, in my opinion. No critical thinking. A lawyer that would stand up and say, oh, the child is doing better in school. Oh, okay, we'll let the child live with his mom then, without any investigation on what's going on. Not looking at what's underneath all the problems. Like, why is this going on? People with borderline or any type of personality disorder generally lack self-awareness. They're not willing to look within themselves and say, what am I doing to cause a problem? They'll blame others. They take no responsibility. So these things are things to watch out for. And then they'll come out in the court system claiming to protect their child because the other side is evil, they're abusing. And I had a barrage of lies coming my way, like accusations around stalking, around abuse, around not taking care of my child's needs, around doing the wrong things. And all I was doing at any time was trying to do the best I can. And these accusations were completely false. They were based on fabricated stories. And the fact that the judge didn't even acknowledge that, didn't even look at it, there's things that I learned now that I could have done differently. And this was on one of Bill Eddy's last podcasts. And so if you're fighting for alienation, is to remember less is more, and to think of patterns of behaviors of the other person that might be alienating the child and bringing that up to the judge. So don't do more than 3 and have ample evidence of how this is transpiring. So for me, there was helicoptering in and protecting the child. Evidence was constant text to my child about, are you safe? Whenever I made a decision and my son didn't agree with it, he would call his mom to save him. Like, these are things I could have included, but to make it simple, so the judge then has a red flag that there's something not going on that's right here, that this is not normal behavior, that this seems a bit irrational. Like, there was an example where we were in a mediation and the judge was sharing a story, because what was happening was my ex was saying, my ex-husband left my son in the bush on his bicycle and walked away when he was crying. And the truth of the story was, my son was 13. We were mountain biking in a bush on a well-known trail. He fell off his bike. He started crying, didn't have any major injuries, just fell. He wouldn't stop crying, and he does have high sensitivities, and now I understand that. And I decided to walk away because hopefully he would get up. So the judge actually said, this is normal behavior. If somebody is having a temper tantrum, you're likely at some point in time just going to say, okay, that's enough. I'm going to go away. You calm down. And that's what I did. But even though the judge said that to my ex, she didn't respond. He knew that this was going on, but still was trying to mediate something. And at that point in time, you'd figure that the judge would see that there's a problem and would question, why is the other person doing this? And this is another thing, like focusing in on what's not working. My ex constantly violated the visitation rights. She put the power into my son that he can make the decision about seeing me or not, which left me powerless and gave my son all the power at an age where he does not have critical thinking skills. He was only 13. And things like allowing a child to make decisions, major life decisions at the age of 13, is not normal behavior. That's something you would not do. So these are the things to watch out for. Would a rational human being say or do that? Okay, so I'm going to now move on. I just want to talk a bit about advocates out there. And there's many advocates. One of them, and I can share this because it's public knowledge, I worked with a gentleman called Greg Ellis. He was a Hollywood actor. I'm not sure where he is right now. Apparently he's missing in action. And he and I hooked up because I was very interested in what he was doing. So I connected with him and then I volunteered to help him out. Anyway, the relationship didn't go well. However, I learned a lot about people because he's indeed alienated as well. And he wrote a book and it was interesting working with him. I learned a lot. And there was many people that were trying to support him in his efforts. And he was all about the presumption of innocence in the court of law, that in a criminal case, there is a presumption that the other party is innocent until you prove them guilty. Well, that doesn't happen in family law. There's almost a presumption of guilt, and there's no evidence to back things up yet. Decisions are made. So I completely side with him that is so important to have this presumption of innocence. And his podcast was called The Respondent. His book was titled The Respondent as well. And it's all about that there's the respondent, this person that has to respond to something in the court of law. And how there's this concept called the silver bullet as well. And people are being trained on how to use a silver bullet to get through and to prove to somebody else that they're being alienated and the other person's the abuser. This is a problem, is a judge, in my opinion, should stop and consider what is the truth here versus one side against the other side. Now, this is not cheap to do. This is expensive to do personality assessments, to have a psychologist come in, and I'm sure they're dealing with limited resources and things like that. But you figure the $30,000 or whatever needs to be spent up front, paid for by the taxpayer, possibly would have a huge positive impact on future expenses and future stress and anxiety that many people have to face due to this. Suicide rates, medications around anxiety, all these consequences of not doing that are enormous, and they last years and sometimes a lifetime. And because there's a chance I'll never see my son again. Right. But I always have to deal with this. I always have to grieve this, and there's no grieving at the end of it because he's still alive. There's no end. I can't. He's there, and I am portrayed as the evil one who's a criminal, and he has every right not to be in touch with me. Wow. Like, just incredible how the family law system can actually help enable this to happen. Unbelievable. And to be alienated feels like I am being thrown in prison and having rocks thrown at me, and you should be ashamed of yourself. It's so isolating. It is so sad. It is so belittling. I've lost my identity as a dad, all because of an alienating parent and the judicial system that allows this to happen. I'm being treated like a criminal, that I have no right to see this person because of who I am. Wow. In a world where there's movements around wokeism and all these different things, that the family legal system can treat people this way. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. And it's hard to imagine what it's like unless you're going through this. To have your child all of a sudden told that, yeah, you don't have to see that person, and your other parent should be your protector. And they are the abuser, generally speaking. They're the ones that are abusive. And this system allows kids to sometimes be with the abuser. And I hear the impact of that on my son in his podcast. It's unbelievable that this is allowed to happen. So anyway, with the back, I go on a bit. You see, this is why I was waiting to record this podcast. But this whole thing about presumption of innocence is really important, because again, we're treated like criminals, and that's not right. And again, it has a whole bunch of different long-term costs. There's also just around the importance of like understanding, why is there a family breakdown? What is happening? Enforcing some sort of counseling, but knowing that the person that you're likely counseling might have a personality disorder, and therefore, if they don't want to get it, they're not going to get it. People who have these disorders can work on themselves if they're willing to acknowledge that they have a disorder. I believe that before you hook up with anybody, like I mentioned earlier, that there should be some sort of mandatory program where you get to know the other person, where their history is evaluated, because those will maybe play out in the relationship. Maybe they won't. Maybe that person is self-aware enough to go deal with that stuff. Maybe they're not. But this would limit family breakdowns and dysfunction. Now, there are different solutions out there that I feel could work. One is, I think, education of the family law system, where there's a checklist of if there's any accusation or if there's any challenge around custody disputes, that there are things that you need to go through. Is this happening? Is this happening? Is this happening? And having these open and honest conversations with two people in a room, the mother and the father, not a lawyer representing, because their job is to get their client to win. That's it. My ex in court, she didn't say a word. The lawyer said the words. Now, I self-represented. However, knowing that lawyers are there to win for their clients, even if the client is guilty of a criminal charge. And in these alienation cases, I would argue it's a criminal offense because you're ruining people's lives. You're murdering them off, essentially, not literally. However, eventually the stress, anxiety, and everything does build up, and it can lead to death. And mind you, we all die anyway. However, the power is given to the lawyer to help fabricate a story that may not be true. So if a judge could actually just sit in front of both parents and have a psychologist there as well, who has some ability around how to tell if we're dealing with a personality disorder here, I think it can go a long way. Now, mind you, people with personality disorders can hide their disorder. They're masterful at that. So that's a challenge. And I don't know how to get through that other than maybe character references or something like that, like people that really know that individual, both from both sides, like friends, previous friends, to describe what they saw in the relationship or what they've heard. And if I could turn back the hands of time, I definitely have friends that's told me afterwards, yeah, Glenn, we always knew that there was something up with her. She has a personality disorder. And most suspect it's borderline. But again, I don't know if it's ever been diagnosed. So that's one thing. The other thing is to enforce the education that they enforce. They say they enforce this when you're about to go through a parental dispute around a parenting course and what to watch out for, that people should be mandated to do that before they get married and be mandated to complete it if they go through a divorce proceeding. Apparently my ex never went through it. And I learned a lot from that around what not to do. This is something that can happen. The other thing is, I think we need to have a collective voice which comes up with and collaborates with different organizations around the world that are trying to look at this as well. And there's so many different organizations looking at parental alienation, and there's different countries doing different things. But for us to collaborate and learn from each other, there are so many independent thinkers out there and people trying to advocate for this. Amy Baker is a big one who has like tons of books out there on parental alienation. So there's individuals out there. And there is also a parental alienation conference, but they don't seem to, from what I see, be making much headway. We need to share our stories. And that's my intention, is to share my story of what I went through, how I experienced this. What have I dealt with? And hopefully that will get some attention. We need to get the attention, though, of the people that matter. The people that are there to build stronger families. One thing that one of the podcasters out there and YouTubers out there is doing is she is approaching universities and colleges in the United States to let them know about this thing called parental alienation. Many people are not aware of it. Well, through awareness comes change. And you look at any movement that happened out there. It took a few players to get together and start saying, this is what's going on, everybody. Wake the hell up. And we can make a difference if we have a collective voice and we inspire others and spread the word. We don't have to have completely broken families, but we need to start seeing each other as a valuable member of a family. We're all doing the best we can. But know that if we're dealing with people who have these disorders, it's going to be a struggle at times. And to know earlier rather than later that maybe this is what I'm dealing with, and as a result, I need to do things differently. I can't expect rationality. And I did not know that. And if I, again, would have known all this information, I believe I still might have a relationship with my son. I believe that he would be a key part of my life because I would have dealt with it completely differently. But I had no clue. I had absolutely no clue because we're not educated, generally speaking, about these types of disorders until we're faced with the disorder. Thanks for listening.